Channel Y. Channel Y. A South Asian Canadian channel.
Hi, this is Priyanka Chopra and you're watching Channel Y.
The biggest South Asian media group, Y Media. Y Media. Y Media has newspaper, midweek, radio, South Asian Pulse.
Hi, I'm Amitabh Bachchan and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
Hi, this is Amir Khan and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
अब हर दिन सुने GTA का #1 रेडियो स्टेशन FM 91.9
Television. You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y.
Prime Minister, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Online, SouthAsianDaily.com. The biggest South Asian media group, Y Media.
This part of the program is brought to you by Midweek Newspaper, published every Tuesday.
Hello and welcome to Y Media Political Sensex. I'm your host, Ramona Singh, and today joining me is Dr. Sara Singh. She is the NDP Deputy Leader, and welcome to Y Media.
Thank you so much, Ramona, for having me on. I'm excited to be back.
Absolutely. So, Sara, this is a massive thing. We're going into an election. This was your first term, and I have to say that you, in 2018, when it was the PC Conservative wave, you went against the wave and you you won a seat in Brampton Centre, which is massive to go against the wave. And on top of that, you became deputy leader as a first-term MPP. Then COVID hit, and then also you got your PhD, so congratulations.
Thank you so much. I know it's been an interesting 4 years. What a time to get elected, but it's been an honor to serve and represent the people of Brampton Centre and also take on a lot of additional responsibilities as a first-time MPP.
So what was that? What was the journey like for you for these past 4 years? And of course, when it comes to COVID, what were some of the constituents' concerns that you dealt with?
Well, it's been a very interesting journey. I don't think anyone predicted that we would be facing a pandemic, a global pandemic. So that made being an MPP very different for us as first-time MPPs. We dealt with a lot of local community concerns when the pandemic came around. Lots of small businesses, for example, that had their doors closed, couldn't get assistance from the government, confusion around vaccines and whether we were going to get them in our communities. So these types of concerns were some of the things we saw. But, before the pandemic, it was a great time for everyone, being able to get out and connect with residents in a community that I was born and raised in. It was a real treat to be able to do that work. And we're excited to be able to kind of get back to a little bit of a normal now that the sort of pandemic is winding down.
That's good. And maybe if you can share with us your secret of what grounds you with everything that I mentioned that you've been through and also going into an election.
First and foremost, I have to say I couldn't do any of this without my amazing family. My parents and my siblings, they really helped keep me grounded and provide me that support. And of course, I'm a very spiritual person, and so just my faith, keeps me grounded and keeps me motivated to keep fighting. Because it has been difficult, but despite the challenges, having a strong support network has kept me just motivated to keep fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to talk about a massive win. You put in a motion just on March 31st for a dedicated cancer facility for a Brampton hospital. The funding that was approved was $365 million. So tell us about that.
Yes, thank you. It's actually really exciting, as opposition members, to have a motion supported by the government. And this was a real personal one for me. In 2017, I lost my older brother to cancer. It's part of life, and thank you for your condolences. But in that experience, we had to leave Brampton in order to get the care that he needed. As I got elected, I realized we weren't alone in that experience, that so many people across Brampton have to continuously leave our city in order to access the life-saving health care that they need, whether that's going to Mississauga, driving all the way to Toronto, and it shouldn't have to be that way. And that's why this motion, supports the work that William Ulcer is doing. They did have a plan for a cancer care center. However, they hadn't received the support for that from the government. And so this motion called on the government to fully fund the cancer care center so that the taxpayers of Brampton don't continue to have to pay, their share for health care. In Brampton, as you know, we've never received our fair share of provincial health care investments. And so this is a huge win for our local community because this this now puts the burden on the government to pay for this, not our local community members.
Absolutely. And so given that NDP is the official opposition and the PC party has a massive majority since the last election in 2018, talk to us about how important it is to reach over party lines to be able to get important things approved and passed for Ontarians.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of times people don't realize that opposition members can actually get great work done, right? And this is an example of being able to present a motion in the House and have it be supported by the government. And I think that that's something that we should see a lot more of, because as New Democrats and as opposition members, we do put forward a lot of bills and motions that can help Ontarians, from everything like auto insurance rates to helping build another hospital for our local community. So I'm grateful that this motion was supported, and I hope we see more of that type of work happening.
Absolutely. Now, you raised auto insurance, and that's been the conversation piece for years. Tell us what can be done in Brampton. I mean, it's had the highest insurance rates based on the postal code, even though, according to a website called rates.com, that Brampton's now the number 4th municipality after Vaughan, Richmond Hill, and what other city? Yeah, so Vaughan, Ajax, Richmond Hill, then Brampton, but it's still a very high rate. So what can be done? What are some of the solutions?
So one of the issues here is that we face postal code discrimination in Brampton. And so it means that drivers are paying based on where they live, not their driving record. And that's something that we need to fix. As New Democrats, we have proposed several times in the legislature legislation that would stop the practice of postal code discrimination, so that drivers would be charged based on their driving record and not, their neighbors, for example. Even though we've been bumped down the list, people in Brampton are still paying exorbitant insurance premiums. Some are saying that it's, unaffordable for them at this point because the cost of living just in general is going up. And so we need to look at this as, from a holistic perspective as well for people in Brampton. We're paying more in auto insurance, we're paying for a lot of housing. And so, there's ways that we can make the affordability issue, one that we can address. And so there are measures that the government can implement in order to regulate the insurance industry. But what it takes is political will to actually do that. Doug Ford and the Conservatives, they campaigned in 2018 on lowering people's auto insurance rates. That hasn't been the reality, even with the pandemic. I think that it's a broken promise, frankly, for people of Ontario. That's why, again, this Thursday, we'll be debating my colleague Kevin Yard's motion to stop the practice of postal code discrimination and make sure that insurance premiums are reduced for people in Ontario.
Do you think you can get that motion passed?
Well, again, with the majority government, they can literally do anything they want to. And so I hope that they will support this motion. Their own members have, bills on the order paper that haven't been put forward. And so, I think really begs the question, what is this government waiting for in order to help provide relief for Ontario's drivers and especially drivers in Brampton?
Yeah, and affordability is an issue. And housing, just this past week, the Ontario government passed and increased the foreign buyers tax. And so, what does that mean for Ontarians, and what would NDP do anything if different?
Well, I think having the foreign buyers tax is a good move. It's actually something we have in our housing plan and that we proposed 2 years ago, because we understand that a lot of Canadians are actually not the ones that are purchasing their homes. It's foreign buyers that are purchasing up a lot of the stock and driving up the cost of that housing as well. So it's a good measure. We've seen other provinces do it as well, but there needs to be so much more that this government is going to do to actually meaningfully address the housing crisis. We know that the Liberals before did not invest in housing, and much of this responsibility has been downloaded to local municipalities. So the government needs to step up to the plate, and it needs to ensure that there's mixed housing, there's diverse housing stock that's being created. That's a huge part of the problem. Developers, obviously, they want to make a profit. That is their motive. And so, the housing sort of market is just escalating very rapidly. The average cost of a house is over $1 million. It's not affordable. So the government should step up to the plate and make sure that developers are creating the type of housing that we need to see so that everyone has a safe place to call home.
And do you have a plan for affordable rental units as well? People who can't even think about owning a home. But
Absolutely. Actually, when I was formerly the housing critic, we had a housing plan that we put together, and it included things like market rents, making sure that we have measures like rent control in place. We hear from residents across the city. I know in my riding we have a number of high-rise buildings, and folks are very worried that the cost of their housing is going up, rents are increasing. They're, one, afraid of losing their housing, but two, they're finding it harder and harder to save for a down payment on their home. So we also in our plan have a equity loan that we would provide to first-time home buyers so that they can actually access the market. I think that's a huge problem for a lot of people. And for the younger generation, sort of the dream of even owning a home seems like a distant reality for them because, the rents are increasing and the cost of that housing is increasing, so they're just unable to save what they need. And they're, relying a lot on the bank of mom and dad in order to be able to cover those costs. And that's creating another sort of financial pressure for our aging population. So I think when we look at the housing market and the needs that are there, we have to have, again, not just a one, sort of a fits-all solution. This has to be something that meets the needs of all the people in this province.
Absolutely. When it comes to inflation rates and affordability, cost of food, gas prices, what would the NDP government do?
Absolutely. First, let's start with the gas prices. There is legislation that my colleague from Timmins actually has proposed to help regulate the price of gas. Unfortunately, the government hasn't supported that legislation. And that would provide real relief to drivers like, yesterday. So, those are measures that we need to implement because, again, the government does have the power to regulate the cost of these goods for people, like the gas, for example. When we think of just the general affordability for people, inflation is at an all-time high. Cost of food is increasing. People are finding it harder and harder. So doing things like raising the minimum wage will help people have decent work as well as a decent wage. And so these are some of the measures that New Democrats have been fighting for and we will continue to fight for. The government has a real role to play here to help make life more affordable, and I think that unfortunately the current Conservative government, under their leadership, we've seen not only the cost of housing increase, the cost of gas increase, the cost of hydro increase. It's just getting more and more expensive, and so as New Democrats, we do have a plan to help fix that and help make life more affordable for everyday Ontarians.
And when it comes to minimum wage that you mentioned, it's been announced that as of October, it's going to go up from $15 an hour to $15.50. Is that a rate that the NDP party supports, or do you guys have a different opinion?
Well, we certainly have a bit of a different strategy in place. And let's not forget, when the Conservatives took office in 2018, they canceled the planned minimum wage increases. So, just on the eve of an election, we see a lot of election promises happening. And these are things that could have been done a lot sooner. Thousands of dollars that could have been in the pockets of Ontarians, hard-working Ontarians. For us, we understand that we need to look at how to increase the minimum wage in a way that's fair for business as well, so that it's predictable and stable as well. What we're seeing with the government, just very rapidly increasing the minimum wage just before an election doesn't allow those businesses to plan effectively as well. So, we have a plan to get us to a decent wage for people that is fully costed and over 4 years, slowly increasing that so that it's sustainable in the economy as well. Workers do need to be paid fairly in order to be able to afford all of the things in life, right? But we can't do it in a way that is detrimental to those small businesses, for example.
Yes, I do remember in the previous government, the Kathleen Wynne Liberal government, that was one of the criticism when the rate jumped so high overnight, and for businesses it was very hard for them to manage that new overhead, and also you don't want people to lose their jobs because it just becomes unaffordable for a business to be able to manage it. But going back to affordability, when it comes to jobs, right? So Ontario unemployment rate is at 5.5%. And of course, you dealt with a lot of small business questions during COVID. What do you think the climate looks like? And with businesses opening up and people going back to work in many different industries, what does that look like? And how can the government, be able to help create more jobs and make the environment a lot more affordable in that sense?
Well, it starts with making sure people are being paid a fair minimum wage. And I think that when we look at the type of employment that this government is creating, it's a lot of still part-time, precarious work. What we need to see the government do is ensure that they're working with business to create, full-time, good-paying jobs so people can afford to live in the province of Ontario. It's getting harder and harder for people. And I know that many businesses are struggling just to make ends meet as well. So I think working with those businesses to provide them the supports they need to recover, to help us rebuild the economy is a very important part of the equation, but also taking care of workers at the same time so that, they can be strong and resilient as well as we bounce back. Considering all of that, as well as, like we discussed, really addressing the affordability crisis here, whether it's housing, whether it's our cost of gas, whether it's our auto insurance. These are also parts of the equation that the government needs to consider in order to help us, move the economy forward in a way that's sustainable as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so you're the long-term care critic. You're the critic for long-term care and seniors, and seniors who have fixed income. And unaffordability is an issue.
Huge.
What are some of the challenges that you're hearing in those sectors?
Absolutely, and as a critic for long-term care, home care, and seniors, like I said, the housing issue is huge for a lot of our aging population. They're very worried. I spoke with a senior, for example, last week, who was worried whether she was going to be able to continue living in the apartment that she was in on her fixed income because, it may seem like only $100, but for someone on a fixed income, $100 is the difference between them eating and buying groceries or putting the heat on or paying rent. And no senior should have to live in fear of losing their housing or not having the supports that they need. That's why we've called on this government to help support seniors, do things like raise ODSP rates for people who are on disability supports, because those are vulnerable people and they do need to be taken care of. We talk about inflation, and so all of these other costs of living are going up, but people on fixed incomes haven't seen those benefits increase as well, which means that there's also additional pressures to other systems, right? If we don't take care of the social determinants of health for people, ensuring that they have access to housing, this could lead to, impacts in other sectors of our society, like our healthcare system. And so there's a cost savings to actually making sure that people like our seniors or people with disabilities are properly supported in the right type of housing and living decent lives as they deserve to. Another big piece of the equation for our aging population is having access to home care supports. I know in many cultural communities like ours, being able to age in place and age at home with your family is so important to seniors and elders in our community. But those supports are not there when we need them. And so one of the things we've been advocating for, and I've been advocating for as the critic, is investments in our home care system so that, we can, down the line, actually save the long-term care system money if we're able to invest in the supports that seniors and their caregivers need to be able to age in place and age with dignity as well.
Absolutely. And climate plan is very important because climate change, and we've seen that in the last few federal elections as well. What are your thoughts on that? And is the answer a carbon tax? Or are there other solutions that can be put into place?
Absolutely. When I talk to young people, this is sort of the major priority for them. And I think that when we think of our environment, we need to be stewards of our environment. We only have one planet for us to all call home. And so much more needs to be done in order to help address this and have a just transition as well. A carbon tax is a part of the equation so that we can offset some of the impacts that we are causing to our environment. But it's also things like, rebates for electric vehicles to help ensure that people are able to purchase more environmentally friendly vehicles. Something that unfortunately this government, conservative government, canceled when they came into office in 2018. Measures like that can actually help us offset carbon in a different way and offset our carbon footprint in a different way. So I think we need to explore those. And again, as New Democrats, we've put forward our Green New Democratic Deal, that lays out a plan to help us transition our economy, get to net zero, but also invest in the good green jobs that we know are out there.
And so the science table tells us that we are in the 6th wave of COVID. What are your thoughts on that, and when it comes to all the COVID mandates that have been removed?
No, it's very clear based on the numbers, and as the science table and so many other experts are making very clear, we are in a sixth wave, and you know, it is unfortunate here in the province of Ontario. We actually had some of the longest lockdowns because the government didn't act quickly enough. It was very reactive to the pandemic. You know, measures like paid sick days, something the science table and our local mayors even here in Brampton and Peel all called on this government to implement, could have helped us, you know, maybe blunt the wave a little quicker, but also avoided some of the lockdowns that we saw here in Brampton, for example. You know, as we head into the sixth wave, we haven't heard from Dr. Moore in 4 weeks. You know, the Premier doesn't seem to be taking this very seriously and isn't providing clear direction to people here in the province of Ontario. I think people are feeling very, you know, confused, scared, and a little abandoned at this point as we head into a sixth wave. You know, I think we need to see a lot more leadership from the province, from the Minister of Health, from our Chief Medical Officer of Health, to help Ontarians get prepared and do the right thing, because we know that they will do that.
Yes, and I want to share numbers with you that I have, different kind of numbers, not COVID numbers, that just was released on the fundraising numbers for Q1 of this year. And the PCs led the fundraising effort with over $3.1 million. But what's interesting to me is that the NDP came in second at over 1.7 million, and then the Liberal Party at 300,000. But what's interesting here is the number of donors for each party. So the PC party had 2,800 donors. Average donation was $1,100, and the NDP had 27,484 donors with the average donation of $62.80. And so, you know, a lot of people say that donations could amount to votes. And so what do you say about more than 27,000 people donated to the party, which is above and beyond compared to the other parties? And that means that potentially they're buying into the NDP vision. And as we're, you know, as businesses have opened up and people are going back to their normal lives, what is that vision that NDP has? And of course, what you think of those numbers?
You know, I think the numbers are very exciting. I think it shows us that people are ready for change and they believe in the vision, the hopeful vision that New Democrats have put forward. You know, we as New Democrats have always relied on smaller donations and people power. And, you know, the numbers show us that. Conservatives have relied on big donors and big money in order to fuel campaigns. So I think it's really exciting to see how many people want to support New Democrats, want to see us have the resources we need to win the next election and make Andrea Horwath our next premier as well. You know, with her leadership, I think that people are excited for something different, and they also know that things are broken here in Ontario. And so I think with Andrea Horwath's leadership, we will be able to fix many of the problems like the housing crisis, make sure that, you know, life is more affordable for people, address the backlogs in our hospital, and ensure that our aging population has the supports that it needs. You know, just some of the things that are broken here in Ontario that I know New Democrats are ready to fix. And so I'm excited for us to, you know, form government in the next election and help lead this province out of this pandemic and into an economic recovery.
That's fantastic. So that means you are running in the next election on June 2nd.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to serving the community I was born and raised in for another 4 years, and hopefully the people of Brampton will give me that opportunity. It honestly has been a rewarding experience to be able to stand up in our legislature and bring the voice of our local Bramptonians to Queen's Park, and I hope I can do that for many, many more years to come.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sara Singh. That is all the time we have today on Y Media Political Sensex. Please tune in on Channel Y. And for any of the episodes you've missed, watch us on social media. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care and be well.
You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y, a South Asian Canadian channel. The biggest South Asian media group, Y Media. Y Media. Y Media has newspaper, midweek, radio, South Asian Pulse.
Hi, I'm Amitabh Bachchan, and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
Hi, this is Amir Khan, and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
अब हर दिन सुने GTA का #1 रेडियो स्टेशन FM 91.9
Television. You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y.
Prime Minister, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Online, SouthAsianDaily.com. The biggest South Asian media group. Y Media.
This part of the program is brought to you by Midweek Newspaper, published every Tuesday.